Hello and welcome to a Thursday, live right here on the early line on SportsGrid and all across the SportsGrid network. That includes sportsgrid.com/watch, where you can find your favorite destination and consume everything all across the grid. I am Ben Stevens. He is Donnie Rightside. We are together here for the next 3 hours, up until 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which is when we last spoke yesterday, DRS. And in the 24 hours, a little bit less than that, since we last spoke, what a whirlwind it has been in the world of sports. A 24-hour span when your head is just left spinning because of all the news that has come down the wire in the last day, mainly in the coaching carousel, and that continues bright and early on this Thursday morning. DRS, the breaking news in the last half an hour after 24 NFL seasons together, Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots have mutually agreed to part ways.
Yes, they have, and it's time, right? If you are a Patriots fan, which again I'm not, but there are obviously a lot of Patriot fans out there, you saw this coming from a mile away. Once Tom Brady left, it would be interesting to see how Bill Belichick was going to adapt, and it's hard. Life after the best football player in the history of the sport leaving your program, but it just felt like it was a mutual break. Now, we're going to talk about some other coaches in just a little bit, but when you see a mutual parting of ways, I honestly believe that's what happened in New England. You said, you know what, at the end of the season, we'll revisit this. Things didn't go well. Bill, what's your future here? And also, Robert Kraft, what's your future for the New England Patriots? I think they just came to an agreement. This is the perfect split. Nobody's upset. I actually think they have a coach already in waiting, or maybe they make a move for Mike Vrabel. We'll get into that just a little bit later. But I don't think anybody looks at this news and is absolutely stunned. And again, even as a Patriot fan, I doubt anybody in New England is like, oh, man, I can't believe this. How are we going to survive? Sometimes new starts are fresh, but how long can you ride? You had 24 magical years in New England. It was just time, Ben. It just was.
Let's bring in that Sports Grid radio audience here to start off a Thursday on the early line at Sirius XM Channel 159. All of our other radio terrestrial affiliates now also in the fold as well. He is Donnie Rightside. I am Ben Stevens. What a 24-hour span it has been in the world of football head coaching. Donnie, I don't think it's hyperbole or too lofty to say that in the last 24 hours, it has been a historic day in terms of football head coaches. It got started yesterday afternoon. A stunner in Seattle. After 14 NFL seasons, Pete Carroll was out as the head coach of the Seahawks organization, transitioning into an advisory role. But of course, his time as the head man for the Seahawks franchise comes to a close. A few hours after that, yesterday evening on a Wednesday, the real shock. Nick Saban, after 17 years in Tuscaloosa, nearly 30 years as a head coach in college football, retiring from the sport that he has defined over the last 2.5 decades. And then bright and early on this Thursday morning, even before we started at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots agreed to a mutual parting of ways after 24 NFL campaigns together. We'll get to Saban, we'll get to Pete Carroll, all of that later in this opening hour. But let's take a moment to look back on the 24 years Bill Belichick spent at the helm of the Patriots organization in Foxborough. You can debate who the best NFL head coach is of all time, Vince Lombardi, Don Shula, Papa Bear, George Halas, but nobody has won more Lombardi trophies than Bill Belichick. 6 Super Bowl championships as the head coach of the Patriots. 302 regular season wins in his 29 years as an NFL head coach, 24 in New England, 5 spent with the Cleveland Browns. With his 31 playoff wins added on, that's 333 in total, only 15 wins away from surpassing Don Shula for the most wins ever by a head coach in NFL history.
What he has done has been absolutely magical. And we talk about those 24 years. Sometimes, Ben, you do have to catch lightning in a bottle. And that means a fantastic football mind in Bill Belichick. Then pairing him with the greatest football player to ever play in the history of professional sports. And then you say to yourself, I'm going to put myself in a division where the other teams just can't get it together. And we hammer them year after year after year. Home field advantage, playoff runs, Super Bowl runs, and championships here. I always like to say this too. I'm usually a big-time hater, right? Belichick can't do whatever he can without Brady. Understandably, it didn't work out all that well. But nobody's going to take away Phil Jackson. Oh, where would Phil Jackson be without Jordan and Kobe and, Shaquille O'Neal? No. Otherwise, everybody else would have been able to step into that position and do that. Who knows where the Patriots franchise would have been if Bill Belichick never left the Jets and resigned to go to the New England Patriots here? Who knows what would have happened between those two teams here? The one thing we cannot deny, the success on the field. And for that 24 years, I don't think anybody said Bill Belichick is an overrated head coach and he's lucky to have Tom Brady. No, what you said is Bill Belichick is a genius and he's paired with the greatest football player in the history of the sport. And those were the results. Something we probably will never, ever see again in modern NFL times.
One winning season after Tom Brady left in the past 4 in New England. This year was the least amount of wins Bill Belichick has ever had as a head coach in the National Football League, including those 5 seasons in Cleveland. 4-13, his final record in his final year with the New England Patriots. But again, he did not have many losing seasons throughout his NFL tenure. Now, there are further reports from all the NFL insiders out there on this Thursday morning that Bill Belichick, unlike Nick Saban, who is retiring, or Pete Carroll transitioning into an advisor role with Seattle, Bill Belichick is still interested in continuing to coach, and an organization that continues to be brought up as a name to watch in the Bill Belichick coaching cycle is the Atlanta Falcons. So, Donnie, that's the next question on this timeline for Bill. What do you think is next for Bill Belichick?
He's definitely going to be a head coach. And here's also what you like, too. When you take a look at Robert Kraft, I mean, honestly, he could have said, hey, Bill Belichick, we're not going to bring him back. We're going to sell him to the highest bidder. But sometimes that's not the right thing to do. Like, Bill Belichick earned those 24 years in New England. And if you come to an agreement like, hey, just let me go where I want to go here. So many times you hear about big-time athletes being traded. I'm going to give you a list of teams. Well, I don't care. I'm just going to trade you to whoever gives me the highest draft capital back in that position. So the fact of the matter, they were able to come to an agreement and say, you know what? Good luck in your future. We're going to go our separate ways. You go do your thing, and we'll meet at the Hall of Fame one time. And, you'll come back for, just like Tom Brady did this year, for a Ring of Honor, and everybody will be able to celebrate Bill Belichick one more time. But you can tell, you're right about Nick Saban. It looks like it's like, you know what? I did what I had to do. It's time to fish on some lakes here, take some vacations with the wife, and just enjoy some time. Bill Belichick is an absolute football lifer where when he wakes up tomorrow morning, he hopes he has a film to break down, and Ben, he's right back in it. So, and we talked about this yesterday too, right? When do you think this is going to happen? I said definitely before Friday. Well, here we are talking about it on a Thursday, and who knows? He might have a job by Sunday night because these wheels in the NFL are going to turn quickly with these positions opened.
Continuing reaction on Bill Belichick later on in this opening hour. For the Patriots standpoint, Gerard Mayo, the linebackers coach in New England currently, who played and, of course, worked under Bill Belichick, is a front runner to land the head coaching job. But a former New England defensive staffer and a New England Patriot linebacker, Mike Vrabel, is now on the open coaching market as well after being let go by the Tennessee Titans earlier this week. So Bill Belichick leaving New England was expected. Nobody thought Nick Saban would retire. We look back at the GOAT up next on the early line.
Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev.
Go run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now, we saw a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
I don't care if they win because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said, we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, your mind. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars had, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. Not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
So again, it has been a wild 24 hours in football head coaching circles here on a Thursday morning, live on the early line on SportsGrid. The breaking news this morning, it was expected at some point now in the offseason for the New England Patriots. The Pats and Bill Belichick agreed to a mutual parting of ways after 24 years together. Now, there was some conversation for the 71-year-old Bill Belichick, what he would do in the future. There was some conversation as well, Donnie, for the 72-year-old Nick Saban, following Alabama's loss in the college football playoff semifinal in the Rose Bowl just last week to the eventual national champions in Michigan. What would Nick Saban do moving forward? But all indications he would be back for the evolution of college football into 2024. And then, frankly, out of nowhere, the news broke last night. Nick Saban retiring as the head coach of Alabama football. After 17 years in Tuscaloosa, 28 years as a college football head coach, including stops at Toledo, Michigan State, LSU, and of course 17 years in Tuscaloosa at the helm of Alabama, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, as a head college football coach, has now stepped away. Nick Saban retiring after 17 seasons as Alabama's head coach.
And Nick Saban was perfect for college football, like everywhere he went, right? You forget about the Michigan State days, but I know a lot of people that are watching now, still younger people, like, oh, he won a national championship at LSU? Yes, he was that dominant across. The only thing he didn't really succeed in was being a head coach in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins. You might say to yourself, well, maybe he's retiring from college football and wants to go try it at the pros. That's not his gig here. You know why Nick Saban was fantastic? Because, yes, he was an unbelievable X and O's person here. He had the ear of everybody. You want to pick up, hey, look, I'm struggling with this 3-4 defense. Bill Belichick would call him and fly down, and they'd have lunch and talk about schemes. He was an unbelievable, ambassador to college football, but also he was the single best recruiter out there on the market. That was his edge. People sort of forget this. Like, if you're looking at the Alabama history under Bill Bryant, they were unbelievable. They were dominant. They were recruiting machines. This was before, like, the integration of college football. Then throughout the 80s, they did recapture a little bit in the early 90s with the national championship, which they beat Miami in the Sugar Bowl. But after that, it was a lot of, oh, Alabama's never going to regain anything. Like, Nick Saban didn't step into, like, a stacked USC program or a stacked Ohio State program and just take over the helm like, oh, this is easy. He had to rebuild Alabama into an absolute national power power, and he did that here. So whoever's going to get that next Alabama job, you're going to step into the shoes of Nick Saban. It's going to be really hard to replicate all those national championships and SEC championships and winning seasons here. That's going to be tough. But for Nick Saban overall, I truly believe, and we don't get to see this, he's very, very good with the media. And once you put him up there, I don't care if he's going to be in the booth as a color guy, a pregame show guy, you're going to want to hear what Nick Saban has to say. And it's the best transition. I did everything I could for college football and Alabama. I'm going to step away a legend with maybe the best singular coach in the history of that sport. And then I'm going to enjoy the rest of my years here talking football on sets, working 2 to 3 days a week and just chopping it up with everybody. He's going to live the perfect life if he already hadn't.
I would not be surprised, and we'll speak to our own Mike Blewett a little bit later on. There has been some speculation already that Nick Saban might be heading to the desk for College Game Day. However, when it comes to Nick Saban, right, we can debate, is Bill Belichick the greatest NFL coach of all time? Frankly, I don't think there's much of a debate in the college football ranks. Nick Saban, the 5th most wins all time, 297. For how great Bill Belichick was in New England, 266 and 121, his overall record in 24 years with the Patriots, a winning percentage of 68.7. Saban's overall winning percentage in college football, 297, 71 and 1, is 81%. At Alabama, it's even better. He coached in 235 games at the helm of the Crimson Tide, and he won 206 of those games. That is a win percentage of 87.5. Alabama and Ohio State, the only 2 college football programs in the 17 years since 2007 when Nick got to Tuscaloosa that had a winning percentage in college football north of 80%. He has 7 national championships, the most ever in the history of college football as a sport, 6 with the Alabama Crimson Tide, tying Paul Bear Bryant, the man that put Alabama on the map, and of course that national championship with LSU as well for a grand total of 7. Nick Saban is the greatest to ever do it in college football, and he had career resurgences at Toledo, at Michigan State, and at LSU. Donnie, for most of my lifetime, when I think Alabama football, I think Nick Saban. But to your point, in the decade before Saban got to Tuscaloosa, 1997 to 2006, this might sound like hearsay. This might sound like insanity to younger people out there. Alabama, in a 10-year span, had 4 years with a losing record. 4 seasons with a losing record in a 10-year, decade-long span before Nick Saban got to Alabama and reinvented that college football program so that by year number 3 in 2009, Alabama stood on top as a national champion in the sport.
Yes, and also, and right away, it was like, okay, the SEC football, we're going to have unbelievable athletes, we're going to play dominating defense, and we're going to get the 17 points and beat other programs. And you brought this up when we were talking before the show, the evolution of Nick Saban's game. You don't just, you can't just be a dinosaur. Hey, what worked in the 90s? Like, otherwise, Steve Sperry would still be around college football winning, 13, 14 national championships. You have to adapt. It's like, hey, I'm going to run the fun and gun, and that's my offense. And if you figure it out, you're a better coach than I am. Like Nick Saban going from, we're going to run the football and control the clock to 5 wide spread with athletic quarterbacks here just shows what he wanted to do and how he wanted to adapt. And also, Ben, take a look at all the different coaches that he brought in from every race, every religion, every different philosophy, and it always worked out. I always love to hear the stories about Nick Saban where they talk about the coaches would just get into a big conference room, and you knew when you had Nick Saban's ear is when you got to sit at the big desk where everybody sat on the outside here, and just getting the input that he was listening to and the ability to adapt was absolutely phenomenal. Nick Saban, certainly, whoever's going to take that Alabama job is going to probably get a good 1 to 2 year run because of all those recruits. But when you start losing 2, 3, 4 games, you start getting compared to Nick Saban. That's going to be a tough one. But this is a true icon here, stepping away again at the right time, because you know when the right time is, Ben? When we're surprised by everything, right? When it's like, wow, I can't believe Saban walked away. You know he's walking away at the absolute pinnacle of his career, and that's rightfully so.
A legendary head coach in his respective sport that didn't need a full grand finale of a season to get all the accolades and gifts. You don't say, Donnie Rightside. Just retiring when the time felt right. And at 72 years old, you might be thinking, hey, 2024, a time of sweeping changes in the collegiate athletics landscape. The evolution to a 12-team college football playoff, the expansion of the SEC, adding Oklahoma and Texas, conference realignment everywhere, the transfer portal, NIL. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing in the mind of Nick Saban. He might moan and be begrudgingly about it, but he adapted his scheme. He was always ready to go, whether it was a coaching philosophy or embracing the changes in the evolutions of college football. He leaned in to NIL and made sure Alabama's recruiting was still at the top. And there will be seismic shoes to fill in Tuscaloosa. The name that is being reported right now for the man to do the encore act of Nick Saban, the front runner at this moment is Oregon's Dan Lanning. Again, huge shoes to fill for this Alabama football program to recreate the level of success that is now expectation that Nick Saban had in Tuscaloosa. But Dan Lanning, one of the bright young head coaches in this sport, of course, tremendous success at Oregon in his 2 years in Eugene. He is from the Saban coaching tree in a way. He was a grad assistant at Alabama back in the mid-2010s, then went to work with a Saban disciple in Kirby Smart and was his defensive coordinator at Georgia before landing the spot as the head coach of Oregon. Plenty of more reaction from the Nick Saban decision to retire, but we did see some movement in the market. Alabama had the second best price to win a national championship at the end of this 2023 college football season. Entering next year, it was plus 550 for the Tide. After Saban's retirement announcement, it's now 10-1. Plenty more coaching news coming your way on the early line now.
Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run, run, run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now, he's a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
favorite. I don't care if they win because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, your mind. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars had, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. Not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
So there is the aftermath in Alabama and the decision behind Nick Saban's choice to retire after 17 years at the helm in Tuscaloosa. So if Nick Saban is done coaching in the college football ranks, what is next for the Crimson Tide football program that has been at the pinnacle of the sport for the better part of the last 2 decades? Who wants to step into those hugely seismic shoes in Tuscaloosa? Because as Donnie mentioned in our last segment, it hasn't always been smooth sailing for Alabama in the post-Bear Bryant era. It is not just the entirety of the expectation that whoever the next head football coach is for Alabama, they will continue the success that Nick Saban had. It is a very difficult thing to do, but that is now the thought in Tuscaloosa. So, Donnie, we mentioned a name in Dan Lanning. He has emerged as the front runner after spending the past 2 years as Oregon's head football coach, a wildly successful defensive coordinator under Kirby Smart, of course, a Nick Saban disciple at Georgia, winning a national championship behind one of the best defenses we have seen in the last decade in college football in 2021. But Dan Lanning is not the only name. Some other big-time names and potential big buyouts to let them free to go to Tuscaloosa have been floated as well. Of course, there is the idea that Dabo Swinney, who played his college football at Alabama, Clemson's head coach, could be in the running. Steve Sarkisian, that was Nick Saban's offensive coordinator a couple of years ago, now the head coach in Austin at Texas, is certainly a name to consider. How about Lane Kiffin over at Ole Miss? Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame? Mike Norvell, the head coach of Florida State. Donnie, what do you make of the opportunity for the next guy up trying to follow in the footsteps of Nick Saban?
It's very hard to do that, as we know, because your expectations right away when you take the job at Alabama right now would be to win a national championship and an SEC. And if you didn't, you're a failure. Boy, we really wish that Nick Saban had never left here. But if you're taking a look at like a certain situation, I think Alabama is a fantastic job. Not this time around, Ben. The next time around. What I mean by that is your coach will come in there. He might have a tough time, and then you'll get that big-name head coach. It's like, all right, good. If it failed already, I'll step in. You look at programs like Ohio State, and I'm not even going to talk about failed. Moving on from Jim Tressel there, and then I believe Luke Fickell had 1 year as an interim coach that didn't work out. So Urban Meyer with that big Cheshire cat smile is like, now it's time to jump in to an absolute sleeping giant here. After one season, they'll love me. And Urban Meyer writes the rest of history that he was unbelievable at Ohio State. You are going to get a huge paycheck here, but is it worth it? And the guys that you just named, Dan Lanning has a pretty good thing at Oregon. You now have 12 teams that make the playoffs, so less pressure on coaches. Dan Lanning can make the playoffs every year as a top 12, get unbelievable support from, Nike and Phil Knight. Phil Knight, Jesus. Phil Knight. Phil Knight there at that point. Yeah, Phil Knight. But, that's the support you want. Do you want to step into the spotlight where it's national championship or bust? I know people want to apply their craft at the highest level. Take a look at Dabo Swinney before he got to Clemson. Okay, solid program in the ACC, took them to the next level. He can just write his check the rest of the way there in Clemson and do whatever he wants. Does he want to step back in? Does going to Alabama mean like, you know what? I always wanted to coach here. It's my dream. I would love to take over for Nick Saban here. That's a tough gig because why? The expectations are high, but they're not just going to hand it to anybody. You are going to be a really good football coach. Put it this way, Ben. Not going to be a head coach at Alabama like, oh, I didn't see that one coming. No, this is going to be a big-time name coming to town expecting to win. Yeah. But that probably means they're already at a great program where the expectations might be less and the paychecks are already similar.
This isn't Tommy Rees getting promoted and elevated from the offensive coordinator spot. This isn't hiring that young up-and-coming coach out of the MAC. No disrespect to the Mid-American Conference, where Nick Saban got his start as a head coach as well at Toledo. This will be a premier name that you know very well who has had success at the highest level of FBS college football. I mean, look at the list of the national championship odds that we will display right here for next year, and the coaches that are tied to these schools currently that could be the next head coach in Tuscaloosa. Steve Sarkisian at Texas, plus 750 for the Longhorns currently, third best number. Alabama, 10-1. They were plus 550 before the news that Nick Saban was stepping down and retiring. Oregon and Dan Lanning, 12-1. Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin, 15-1. Florida State under Mike Norvell at 18-1. And unlike Texas A&M, who is paying $74 million to Jimbo Fisher currently, Alabama has not had to fire a head coach in the last 20 years virtually, or at least the last 17, since Nick Saban became the head man in Tuscaloosa in 2007. There is money to buy out a guy to make him the successor to Nick Saban's tenure at Alabama. It is going to be a big name, and reports as of last night, Alabama is moving quickly. They probably knew behind the scenes that Nick Saban was looking at retirement as a potential possibility. They have already done their due diligence. Alabama has said they want to hire the next head coach of the Crimson Tide football program in the next 72 hours. That would mean by the end of this upcoming weekend. What a time it is in college football as the landscape changes in monumental fashion in 2024. One guy who has been pretty much the epitome of the college football landscape since the mid-2000s, Nick Saban, will not be there for this next evolution. What a time it is in college football. Any final thoughts on Nick Saban, Alabama, college football moving forward, or should we move forward to the other stunner yesterday in Seattle and Pete Carroll stepping down as the head coach of this Seahawks organization?
Yeah, one final note on Nick Saban. The one thing you do know of, he loves Alabama. And there's no way, Ben, he woke up, yesterday morning saying, you know what, now it's time to give it up. You want to have that nice handoff next. And I'm not saying Nick Saban's calling other coaches saying, hey, I'm retiring here. Do you want to take this job? But you're getting the ammo up. You're getting the boosters up here. You're getting people knowing that need to know that won't release that secret. So when he does say, I retired, they have that game plan. They have numbers. They have names. They have agents ready to go. And I'll be surprised, as you would be as well. This is not going to be a vacancy that we're going to see here. Like, oh, man, Super Bowl, I wonder who Alabama gets here. In college football, there is a recruiting class you have to protect. They already lost a top 10 player who decommitted. Not to say they can't get him back, but the stakes are high now. There needs to be a new coach in place, and that new coach knows it as well.
Yeah.
They're not going to drag their feet either. If we're putting a timeline on this for Alabama, honestly, Ben, Sunday night? They'll probably have their new coach by then? This isn't going to take long. Yeah.
Yeah, at the latest, I would say Sunday night. And by the way, the guy you're mentioning, Ryan Williams, the number 9 overall recruit in the 2024 class, a 5-star wide receiver recruit, decommitted yesterday, saying that Nick Saban's decision to retire and the uncertainty in Tuscaloosa is the reason he is decommitting. We just saw the early National Signing Day period. 4 guys that signed their national letter of intent. That now opens up with a head coaching change, the 30-day transfer portal window after a head coach leaves his position also opens in Tuscaloosa. There will be roster turnover, and for that reason, they need to hire the next head coach soon, and that head coach needs to re-recruit his roster to keep all the talent in Tuscaloosa that Nick Saban worked so hard to get there for this Alabama football program moving forward. So again, in the last 24 hours, we have seen Nick Saban retire. The Patriots and Bill Belichick agree to part ways. And then the first stunner of the day, yesterday afternoon, the Seattle Seahawks and Pete Carroll. He is no longer going to be the head coach, evolving, as they put it, into an advisory role within the organization. But whichever way you slice it, he's not the head coach of this Seahawks organization any further. Donnie, how surprised were you by the news that Pete Carroll has done after 14 seasons as the head coach in Seattle?
The only surprise that caught me off guard was the day before, Pete Carroll's like, yeah, I'm coming back here, which meant that probably ownership and the general manager were on the same page. Like, hey, Pete, it's up to you if you want to come back. Love to have you here. And says, I'm coming back. But 24 hours later to role reverse and part ways. Now, granted, they're doing it the right way here. Like Bill Belichick. I don't think Bill Belichick actually got fired in New England. I truly believe that those two came together, Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick. Okay, now it's time to move on. Understandably, fantastic times. We'll catch up later. But something tells me that Pete was coming back here but something changed in the background here to force their hand and fire Pete. Now, granted, they're not going to come out and say, hey, we fired Pete yesterday. We wish him well. No, they gave him the rightful send-off. He was a wonderful coach for the Seattle Seahawks. Championships here, NFC championships, and by all intents and purposes, every single year, the Seahawks felt like they were in it to win it because Pete Carroll's on the sideline, and for some reason, it always worked out in their favor. Now, a couple lackluster years in a row, and Pete getting a little bit up there in age, but this is one of those times where we talk about the Chicago Bears going, okay, Eberflus is coming back. I hope they did their due diligence saying like, well, you know what? The only guy we'll get rid of him for is Harbaugh, and he didn't want to come back. There's no way, shape, or form. Seattle just said, you know what? We said Pete's coming back, but 24 hours later, Ben said, no, he's not coming back. Something has to be in the works in Seattle for a predecessor coming in and probably a big name. That's the only thing I can think of at this point. And maybe we'll probably get into it a little bit later. Is it Dan Quinn? Is it a defensive coordinator? Is it an offensive guy? But make no bones about it. Seattle knows what they're doing now, and I think the wheels are already in motion for that next head coaching hire.
And you could see Pete Carroll yesterday at his farewell press conference as the head coach in the Pacific Northwest, the emotions behind it. It seemed like a guy, despite being 72 years old, the oldest head coach currently in the National Football League, or at least as of this past season, still has the energy and is the most youthful 72-year-old you would ever see. And what he did in Seattle is remarkable. 14 NFL seasons as the head coach of the Seahawks. 11 of those 14 years, Seattle had a winning record. Its first ever Super Bowl championship in franchise history. The 137 wins that you see, the most as a head coach in Seahawks history, the best winning percentage at 60.6% in Seahawks history as well. 10 playoff wins since 2010, the third most among head coaches in the NFL in that span. Plenty more reaction coming on all the head coaching carousel that we have seen over the last 24 hours. Make sure you come back and join us live right here up next on the Early Line on SportsGrid.
Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run, run, run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
So right now, he's a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division favorite.
I don't care if they win because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars have, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression. It's not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Live right here on this Thursday on the early line on SportsGrid, and what a 24 hours it has been. 3 head coaches in their respective spots with their respective organizations and in their respective sports that have defined the last 2 decades pretty much in football. Nick Saban retires at Alabama. Early this morning, Bill Belichick and New England agreed to part ways after 24 years together and after 14 NFL seasons in the same spot. Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. So he will not be the head coach anymore. But as of this moment, Donnie, Pete Carroll is still with the Seattle franchise, working in what they deem an advisory role. 137 wins for Carroll, the most ever as a head coach in Seattle franchise history, won them their first ever Super Bowl championship and Lombardi Trophy, and a .606 win percentage for Pete Carroll in those 14 NFL seasons, the best winning percentage for a Seattle Seahawks head coach ever in the history of that organization. What is next for Seattle? What is next for Pete Carroll?
Here's what I look at Pete Carroll, too. He came to the Seattle franchise and went 7-9 in his first season. Second year, he went 7-9, then 11-5, 13-3, 12-4. That's where the Legion of Boom years, Russell Wilson, Super Bowl championships, routinely finishing at the top of the division. The reason I bring this up is he never bottomed out. Like, you take a look at Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh here, right? Every single year, there is an expectation for us to win a championship, yes, but to be a competent football team week to week, no matter what our record is, we expect to win. He's done that. Like, what are his, again, 7-9 here, 9-8 to end, 7-10, probably the worst season that he had. That's amazing for an NFL franchise, because even guys like Andy Reid, who's certifiable Hall of Fame coach the minute he retires, he had some bad years in Philadelphia from time to time here, which ended up getting him fired. But also, Pete is an older guy. And yesterday when it said, okay, Pete's going to be fired, he's going to move on to the, we're not going to disrespect them. Be that consultant. You could be here for 15 years. You watch the game with the ownership group right next to you. You add some things in. You say, hey, look, we're looking for a new head coach. What's your in point? I get it. He should be that. But hear me out on this. I didn't think Pete Carroll should be a head coach again in the NFL. I just think the time's up and his age. But the more I think about it, he is the perfect steward for a franchise that's battling like turbulence left and right. So you know where I'm going here. There's 2 teams out here. If you sold me on this today, hey, look, Pete, I need you for 2 or 3 years here. Under that, guys, give me what you got, set my franchise straight, put me back in the right direction. You take a look at the Carolina Panthers. They have no first-round draft pick next year. They burned up draft capital. They have an ownership group that's in turmoil. You probably somewhat lost your fan base, and you're a laughingstock of the NFL, which we're starting to talk about the Carolina Panthers the way we did under Daniel Snyder. And it's only been a couple years out of David Tepper. He can take that job, steady it, get the guys in there he needs, build a foundation, and hand it off to that next young and up-and-coming coach where David Tepper is going to pay out the wazoo to get that coach. Place number 2, I think he'll be perfect at. It's the Commanders here. They're going to rebrand everything. It's going to be a new name, new ownership group, new front office, new GM, new players, new practice facility, and a new stadium. You tell me right now, hey, Pete, let me bring you in just to settle the waters here over the next year or 2 before we make that big splash. Let's get all of our investment back. Let's rebuild the franchise. Let's gut it from the bottom. And I think you're the perfect guys at steadying hand to bring energy each day, and you're never going to embarrass this program. And you know what? When we got you, by the time you left, we'll be better off for it. So even though yesterday I'm saying, I'll be fired, he can't come back, those 2 organizations I think make a ton of sense in the short term for Pete Carroll, just to get them back into good graces and set the franchise back and build the foundation.
It is a really interesting point you bring up. Pete Carroll still looks like he has the fire and desire to be a head coach if you read in between the tea leaves of his farewell press conference yesterday as the head coach in Seattle. Yes, 72 years old. Yes, in 2023's NFL season, he was the oldest head coach in the National Football League, but the most youthful 72-year-old the world has ever known. Football years can be like dog years, and that doesn't seem the case for Pete Carroll. Now, as we focus on Seattle, who might be that next man up for the Seahawks? There are a couple of attractive names out there in the coaching cycle. We mentioned Mike Vrabel as a member maybe to go back to New England, but he will be a name in consideration in Seattle. Shane Waldron was the offensive coordinator under Pete Carroll. He has certainly been floated. Is this the move that Harbaugh wants to make back to the National Football League, where there are currently 8 head coaching vacancies around the sport, including the Seahawks and the Patriots as of this morning? So from the Seattle perspective, Donnie, where do you think the Seahawks next turn for their new head coach?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, too, because you want to talk about the ultimate heel turn and move here for Harbaugh to come back into the division where he used to coach the San Francisco 49ers, but then now taking the helm of the Seattle Seahawks. That would be unbelievable great fodder. But I do think it would be a perfect fit for Dan Quinn to go back up there, won a championship there as a defensive coordinator, certainly made his bones as Dallas has an exciting and talented defense that forces turnovers and certainly commands the locker room. And it's not as if it's like, oh, that'd be a big leap of faith. No, Dan Quinn had success in Atlanta and brought them to a Super Bowl. Had it not been for a collapse, he would have a ring on his finger and probably still be the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. But things change here. I think that's a great fit for them, depending on what their plan is at quarterback in the offseason as well. There's a lot of shots here, but the initial thought process was Pete Carroll didn't just get let go by that franchise because they just brainstormed about getting a new head coach. I'm figuring they worked some of the back channels, found out some guys that they didn't know would say yes or possibly saying yes now, and that's why they moved on, because there's a lot of head coaching vacancies. There might even be more to come, but you want to get your guy first, you better move on and not dilly-dally for even 2 to 3 days might put you behind the 8 ball getting the guy that you actually want. I do believe Seattle has the guy they want, and now we're just going to wait on to see who it actually is.
And it is that interesting time in the coaching carousel around the National Football League. The Seahawks are already on to the offseason. The team that Dan Quinn currently works for, the Dallas Cowboys, have a playoff game on Sunday afternoon against the Green Bay Packers. Dan Quinn spent multiple years in Seattle, 2 different stints, came back as the defensive coordinator under Pete Carroll in 2013. That first year together, the Legion of Boom was born, and they won a Super Bowl championship. In that 2013 NFL season, the Seahawks led the league in fewest points, yards allowed, and then takeaways. The first team since the 1985 Chicago Bears to lead the league in all 3 of those categories. And it ended with a Lombardi Trophy, the first Super Bowl championship for that Seattle side. So we'll get all into the coaching news when we start off hour number 2 of the early line. It's one of those whirlwind 24 hours in sports when the news keeps on coming and the hits keep on coming, but you try to wrap your head around everything that has happened. Donnie, as we go now to the NBA, big news out of LA yesterday as well. The Clippers and Kawhi Leonard agreeing to a 3-year, $153 million contract extension. Not the max necessarily, but Kawhi now makes a fully guaranteed and long-term commitment to this LA side. Of course, it's all in for the Clippers with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, James Harden, etc. for a team that has now found their groove in the chase for a Western Conference championship and, of course, eyeing an NBA championship as well.
Yeah, superstars move the needle in the NBA. No surprise there, right, Ben? But also, you know what you need when you head into a new arena to try to sell all those big-time suites? You better get some superstar players with a good basketball team, which the Clippers apparently believe they have now. They're probably going to lock up Paul George to another extension. The only reason why they can't do it with James Harden, Ben, is because why? James Harden isn't eligible to even sign a contract extension until after the season. But this is a business move here. Let's keep the core together. We're playing good basketball. And also, that never hurts the vibes in the locker room, Ben, right? When your superstars are getting locked up here for big money. Like, hey, you know what? Let's buy into it. Let's have some fun and let's win a championship. I'm not going to worry about where I'm going next year, the next 2 years. You're going to be in LA, in your own building. The superstars will be there. Now they're just going to try to track down a championship. But you see these outrageous numbers. Don't be surprised by that. That's the NBA here. That's why that marketing deal is so big. It's designed for the best players in the NBA to get the biggest contracts, and you're seeing that now.
At the end of November, the Clippers were just 8-10 straight up, even after acquiring James Harden. From that point, the Clippers have now won 16 of their last 19 games, including a 6-point, 126-120 victory last night at home against the Toronto Raptors. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George combined for 58, each player scoring 29 points to pace Los Angeles. They did not cover as an 11-point home favorite, as we expected here on the show. After Darko Rajakovic's huge rant after losing to the Lakers, the Raptors do cover as an 11-point road underdog. Elsewhere around the NBA, some news and notes from yesterday and some final scores to recap. It went to overtime, but the NBA's best team, the Boston Celtics, now 29-8. It was a matchup of the best team out east, the best team out west, the two best records and winning percentages in the NBA last night in Beantown. The Celtics stay perfect at home. Now a perfect 18-0 inside TD Garden. 127-120, the victory for the C's in OT.
Yeah, it was a great game, too. And if you watch late in that ball game there was a free throw by Jason Tatum that was missed with under a minute to go. Bach, they teach you this in 5th and 6th grade basketball. Bach's out and get the rebound. Derek White comes in to get that rebound, turns into a Celtics three-point shot. Now, granted, it still did go to overtime, but if that rebound doesn't happen, Minnesota probably wins that game in regulation. The one guy I was most interested from this game overall was Jason Tatum. Unbelievably hot. And then he sat out against the Indiana Pacers, came back in this ball game, 13 of 26 from the floor, 42 minutes played, 45 points scored, easily going over his points total. Celtics are good. How about this? 18-0 at home. Sounds like those Larry Bird days back up at the Boston Garden.
The Timberwolves do cover as an underdog on the road, second leg of a back-to-back. Minnesota this year now 5-5 against the spread as a dog. It was a 9-point spread in favor of the C's. Anthony Edwards over his points prop yesterday, finishing with 29. But when you get a combined 80 out of the Jays, Jason Tatum goes off for 45 points, and Jaylen Brown pours in 35 as well. Hard to beat a Boston team on its home floor. A perfect 18-0 home record for the Celtics. Quickly going to transition us, as we're all over the place, a little bit helter-skelter, but to college basketball, because, Donnie, it's been a historic 24 hours in that sport as well. Not all the head coaching moves, but in the actual results. 2 nights ago, number 1 Purdue, number 2 Houston go down on the same night. It was the first time since 2016 that has happened. And then Kansas, the number 3 team in the country, as a 7.5-point road favorite in Big 12 play against UCF, a new Big 12 member. Well, it's not always easy to walk out of Orlando with a victory. The Knights upset the Jayhawks 65-60. Central Florida winning outright. So number 1, number 2, number 3, and let's take it one step further. Number 5, Tennessee, also upset on the road in Starkville against Mississippi State. The Bulldogs win in a big way at home in Stark Vegas, outright as a 2.5-point home underdog. Hard to win on the road in conference play. And for the first time ever, 4 of the AP top 5 teams in the country lose within a 24-hour span. The madness in college basketball does not wait until March.
No, it doesn't. And conference play, like versus like competition. This is why you're seeing teams like, oh, I didn't expect this to happen. You should have here. And by the way, shout out UCF for getting that victory where we talk about how hard it is to transition. What about Kansas transitioning to new players and new teams in their own conference? And by the way, USF, what I hear? Oh, look, they just hung a national championship banner for 2023-2024. Congratulations, UCF.
At least a Big 12 title, an indoctrination in a Big 12 play. Plenty more coming your way up next here on the Early Line.
Fun to do because you could kind of place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Quarterback at quarterback. We're going to lay some juice. We're going to have some dog prices, and we're going to go right in the middle.
Because I don't know what they're doing. To me, they're in a complete rebuild, Kev. Go run, run, run. That's where overbackers on this 51.5 shot.
Right now, he's a little bit more over money, but it's hovering right around.
The winner of this game will be the division
I
favorite.
don't care if they win because all we care about is the money, baby, the money.
Pro Football Today. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
The wife said we're getting the Stanley Cups, and now they got Stanley Cups in West Virginia.
Yep. They're doing $300 million gross a year in sales.
Listen, man, we don't need that much, man.
They're crushing
I'll take
it.
a little piece of the Stanley Cup. I would drink from the Stanley Cup every day. I'll have inscribed on there. We'll get our BVB inscribed.
Yeah.
Stanley Cups.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
That tells you how good this league is. Jeff, you're mine. Big 12. Who's the team to beat?
Well, it's always Kansas. I don't care who comes in the league. And I love Kelvin Sampson, what he's done at Houston. I don't care. So Marquette, to me, is the best backcourt in the country. Tyler Kolek's the best point guard. Cam Jones is an elite scorer who just plays with such a good pace, and he's so smart.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
What did you think when you saw Lawrence on 3rd and 4th down, those two plays?
When you have a meltdown like the Jaguars had, the clear favorite coming into the season, we all know that, and they choke like they did, and they have this fall like they did, people are going to question what's wrong with Trevor Lawrence. He had a regression this season. Not a major one, but he was not as good as last season. What's happened to the play calling?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Yay, congratulations, but the game was over at that point, so another one of those terrible beats. If you had 3.5, 4, even 4.5, this was a 10-point game until the final closing seconds.
In-game live, prime time. Only on SportsGrid.
SportsGrid, the only streaming sports betting network. Tips, info, and insights to up your IQ. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Live right here on this Thursday on the early line. It's been an opening hour already here on the SportsGrid Network. He is Donnie right side. I am Ben Stevens. Hard to wrap your mind around everything that has happened in the last 24 hours in the coaching carousel that spins now in the football offseason for some. Of course, a quick reminder that we'll continue to break down into hour number 2. Bill Belichick and the Patriots agree to part ways after 24 seasons together. Also in the NFL, the Seattle stunner yesterday, Pete Carroll out as the head coach of the Seahawks after 14 years up in the Pacific Northwest. And in college football, the greatest to ever do it, Nick Saban is retiring after 17 years in Tuscaloosa at the helm of the Alabama football program, 28 years as a head coach in college football. Now to some historic NBA news as well. Victor Wembanyama in the San Antonio Spurs knock off the Detroit Pistons 130-108, but that not the history. Wemby, a triple-double, 16 points, 12 boards, and 10 dimes in a 22-point victory, Donnie, on the road in the Motor City.
And by the way, we can equate coaching changes in the NFL to coaching changes in the NBA because I'm not so sure that Pete Carroll can't be a better basketball coach than Monty Williams is for the Detroit Pistons as they drop to 3-35. Sometimes there's embarrassment. The Spurs aren't even a good basketball team. You are at home and you get beat by 22 points by the Spurs at home. Wembanyama goes for a triple-double. It can't get any lower for the Pistons at this point, but this is probably one of many triple-doubles we're going to see from Victor Wembanyama in his career, Ben.
The first of his NBA career, he accumulated 16 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 assists in just 21 minutes, the second fastest triple-double ever in NBA history, only behind Russell Westbrook, who did it in 20 minutes with the Oklahoma City Thunder nearly a decade ago. But since the Pistons snapped that historic losing skid, ending the 28-game losing streak, they have now lost 6 in a row, and they have only covered 3 times in that span. It was the second time for the Spurs booked as a favorite. They're a perfect 2-0 against the spread this season. Hour number 2 starts in less than a minute.